Honestly, I've been working really hard to get back to full health, and I feel like probably over these last couple of weeks is when I've probably started.
Caitlin Clark's entrance into the WNBA was never going to be subtle. It was destined to be a geological shift, a thunderclap that would echo through every corner of the sports universe. But no one, not even the sharpest minds in the business, could have seen the magnitude of the storm that was already forming on the horizon. Music. As she readies herself for her next high-voltage clash against the Dallas Wings, a silent war is taking shape, one that reaches far beyond the stat sheet and the standings column. It's a conflict being waged in the dim corridors beneath the surface of the game, an intensely personal battle against a towering figure from her franchise's own storied history. A message is being delivered without a single syllable spoken, aimed with surgical precision directly at Wings coach Stephanie White. What Clark is about to unleash next won't simply be for the thousands roaring in the arena or for the teammates fighting alongside her. It's a bold and unmistakable challenge to the very bedrock of the franchise she was chosen to resurrect. This stopped being just about basketball a long time ago. It's about music power, legacy, and the cold, unforgiving arithmetic of a hostile takeover. The story unraveling before our eyes is one of a generational talent's defiance colliding head-on with an architect's carefully constructed legacy, and the collision course they are locked onto is hurtling toward its explosive detonation point, exposing a truth far more layered and gripping than any surface-level rivalry ever could. The pressure placed on Caitlin Clark, from the very instant her name echoed through the draft night microphone, was a gravitational force capable of flattening mountains. It was an impossible, utterly unprecedented burden that no athlete, in any era, male or female, had ever been asked to carry in quite this fashion. She wasn't merely the #1 overall pick. She was a full-scale cultural phenomenon, a living, breathing media empire anointed as the sole savior of the WNBA before she had ever tied her laces for a single professional minute. The Clark effect was real, and it was staggering in every measurable sense. Ticket prices for fever games shot into the stratosphere, matching and in some cases eclipsing the cost of marquee NBA matchups. Venues were being upgraded mid-season simply to absorb the tidal surge of demand she generated. Networks like ESPN were shattering decade-old viewership records for WNBA broadcasts, and every broken number traced back to one single name. Her jersey evaporated off shelves in hours, not merely outselling rival players, but outpacing entire established franchises across multiple professional sports. This was not manufactured hype. It was a full-blown economic revolution, and it was balanced on the narrow shoulders of a 22-year-old still learning the professional game. But that blinding global spotlight dragged an enormous and menacing target into existence with it. Every player in the league, and especially the veterans who had spent years grinding in near-total obscurity for a sliver of the recognition she commanded overnight, was circling. The media's narrative was clean and simple. Caitlin Clark had arrived to seize control. Music, but the league's entrenched stars had an entirely different manuscript in preparation, one written in physical punishment and raw frustration. They absorbed the wall-to-wall adulation, absorbed the suggestion that she alone was a bigger draw than the league itself, and they collectively decided to deliver her a brutal, merciless orientation to professional reality. The target painted on her back wasn't just large. It was overwhelming and impossible to ignore. From the opening game, she was welcomed with a brand of physicality that pushed right up against the boundary of hostility. Hip checks delivered away from the ball, calculated shoves designed to disrupt every step she took, and a relentless stream of verbal warfare were simply the baseline conditions she was expected to operate under. Every opponent, every scheming head coach, and every charged hostile arena wanted the distinction of being the one to shatter the phenom, to serve as proof that she could not withstand the brutality and grit of the professional grind. Her early weeks in the league were a trial conducted entirely in fire, an endless gauntlet of bodily punishment and psychological warfare constructed with one explicit purpose: to locate her breaking point and push her through it. But this suffocating scrutiny and barely concealed hostility was merely the opening act, a prologue for a conflict exponentially more personal and intricate, one that ran a direct line back through the living history of the Indiana Fever itself. And that history carries a name: Stephanie White. To genuinely grasp the full weight of this approaching showdown, you must peel away every surface layer and understand precisely who Stephanie White represents to the Indiana Fever. She is not simply another opposing coach penciled into the schedule. She is a living ghost of the franchise's origin, a cornerstone of its very identity, and an icon embedded deep in the basketball consciousness of the entire state of Indiana. Long before Caitlin Clark was filling arenas to capacity and rewriting record books, Stephanie White was the woman laying the earliest bricks of the organization's foundation. Her playing career was the stuff of state legend, crowned with the title of Indiana's Miss Basketball and a national championship at Purdue, cementing her connection to the region's basketball-obsessed culture long before she ever stood on a sideline. When she accepted the head coaching role, she wasn't merely stepping into a job. She was stepping into a calling. She was the inaugural head coach of the Indiana Fever, the individual charged with the monumental and largely thankless task of constructing an entire franchise from the bare earth up, installing its culture, defining its standards, and breathing life into a brand new professional institution. Her legacy isn't displayed on a wall inside that building. It is the wall. It is woven permanently into the cellular structure of the team Clark now leads into battle every single night. When White stands on the opposing sideline and lets her gaze fall on the Fever's jerseys, she isn't looking at just another opponent. She is surveying the house she designed and built with her own hands, now occupied by a new superstar who arrived carrying the mandate to rewrite its entire story and music, perhaps permanently overshadow everything she created. This injects a profoundly personal dimension of complexity into their matchup that operates on a level no tactical breakdown could ever fully capture. It is a collision of pride, music, and legacy at its most raw and elemental. White knows the crushing pressures that come with that organization, the fever-pitched expectations of that city, and the very genetic code of that team with an intimacy that almost nobody else on earth can claim. She represents the old guard, the original visionary who hauled that team to the WNBA finals but could never close the final chapter with a championship. And now she occupies the opposing technical area, engineering a calculated and methodical assault against the very player handpicked to carry the franchise to the heights she herself never reached. This was never just a regular season contest between the Dallas Wings and the Indiana Fever. It was a quiet, slowly boiling confrontation between the franchise's foundational past and its electric, unapologetic future. And their first encounter of this season announced itself as nothing short of an opening declaration of war. The first time Caitlin Clark stepped onto the floor against a Stephanie White-coached squad, the message from the veteran architect was transmitted loudly, unmistakably, and without the faintest trace of apology. It was a calculated, methodical, and physically punishing introduction to everything the professional game could throw at a player. From the opening tip, the Dallas Wings swarmed Clark with a level of coordinated physical pressure she had not yet encountered in its full, organized form. It wasn't a single defender assigned to slow her down. It was a franchise-wide operation. They pursued her the full 94 feet of hardwood. Music, bumping her off her intended path, crowding every dribble with a hand in her face, and transforming every single possession into an exhausting, will-sapping war of attrition engineered to drain her reserves and test the absolute outer limits of her composure. This wasn't simply tough, physical defense. This was a surgical dismantling, orchestrated by a coach who understood with clinical precision exactly where to apply pressure to make a rookie phenom come apart at the seams. White's game plan was a genuine masterclass in the art of exploiting a young player's vulnerabilities and exposing every crack in her foundation. She unleashed aggressive double teams and hard-angled traps the instant Clark crossed half-court, ripping the ball out of her hands and placing the full burden of production onto her far less experienced teammates, daring them to execute under the weight of suffocating defensive pressure. The defensive mandate handed to every player on that roster was unmistakable in its simplicity. Be physical. Be relentless. And never, under any circumstances, give her an inch of airspace. Veteran weapons like Satu Sabali and Natasha Howard deployed their seasoned professional strength to body her at every turn, guaranteeing that every screen she tried to navigate was answered with a solid, jarring collision. The outcome was a night drenched in pure, unrelenting frustration for Clark, dotted with uncharacteristic turnovers, forced and off-balance shot attempts, and a visible agitation that was impossible to conceal. The Fever walked off the floor with a loss, but the final score was almost entirely beside the point. The real story being authored that night was the painful and public lesson being administered on the hardwood. Stephanie White had transmitted a thunderous message to Clark and to every single person paying attention across the entire league. Your college highlights and your mythologized three-point range carry no currency here. This league is an entirely different organism, and I possess the exact blueprint to dismantle you. It was a strategic checkmate executed on a public stage, A calculated demonstration designed to prove to the world that the phenom was, beneath all the marketing and mythology, still human and dangerously vulnerable. But that brutal, humbling loss, engineered to intimidate and chip away at her confidence, produced an outcome that nobody, and perhaps least of all White herself, could have remotely anticipated. It didn't break Caitlin Clark. It lit a furious, roaring, and utterly unquenchable fire inside her that no defensive scheme on earth was built to extinguish. That night of public struggle became the catalyst for a breathtaking transformation, loading the chamber for a silent, powerful, and absolutely shocking response that the entire league was about to witness. This deepening conflict reaches far beyond the boundaries of one player squaring off against one coach. It is a war being waged across multiple fronts simultaneously, with carefully positioned lieutenants executing their respective battle plans with precision. On one side stands Stephanie White, the weathered and calculating veteran strategist, the chess grandmaster, leveraging her vast institutional knowledge of the professional game in a sustained campaign to contain what is rapidly becoming an uncontainable force of nature. Music, her most lethal weapon on the floor, the queen she moves across the board with the most confidence and authority, is Arike Ogunbowale, the combustible and explosive franchise star of the Dallas Wings. Ogunbowale is one of the most dangerous and reliably clutch scorers the entire league has ever produced. Music, a player who operates with ice water running through her veins, who is built specifically for the oxygen-thin pressure of defining moments, and who does not register fear when surveying any opponent standing across from her. She is the living, breathing on-court extension of White's competitive DNA, a fierce and unapologetically ruthless competitor who embodies with perfect fidelity the aggressive, take-no-prisoners style of basketball that White has designed as the primary instrument of Clark's destruction. Ogunbowale's matchup with Clark isn't a simple exchange of buckets between two talented guards. It is a visceral, personal collision of alpha personalities and uncompromising will, a primal fight to determine who controls the spotlight and who dictates music, the terms and conditions of engagement. Every moment they share on the same court crackles with a palpable, almost electric tension, the unspoken and unresolved challenge hanging heavy in the air between two of the most electrifying and supremely self-assured guards the game has seen in years. Ogunbowale's hard-nosed, relentless, get-to-the-rim-at-all-costs approach stands in direct philosophical opposition to Clark's long-range precision artistry, manufacturing a classic, irresistible clash of contrasting styles and competing identities. On the opposing side stands Caitlin Clark, no longer merely the celebrated and heavily hyped rookie entering with enormous expectations, but now the undisputed and unquestioned leader of a young, ferociously hungry, and rapidly ascending Indiana Fever roster. She is no longer competing simply for her own statistics or personal milestones. She is fighting to declare, loudly and without ambiguity, that her era has formally and permanently arrived, and that the team she leads is a legitimate and credible threat to every contender in the league. This is fundamentally about realigning the balance of power across the entire landscape of the WNBA. The rivalry is soaked in symbolism that runs deeper than any individual game. White and Ogunbowale represent the entrenched and unyielding established order, the hardened, gritty veterans who subscribe without reservation to the doctrine that respect is carved out through suffering and sacrifice, not gifted by the machinery of media hype. Clark represents the incoming new wave, the revolution at the door, the undeniable and overwhelming talent that carries within it the very real potential to tear that old and comfortable order completely to the ground. The court has been transformed into their battlefield, and the narrative that defines every possession of every game between them is chillingly, perfectly simple. The past versus the future, fighting for the soul, the identity, and the ultimate direction of the Indiana Fever. Something fundamental, something deep and permanent, shifted inside Caitlin Clark in the immediate aftermath of that first punishing and humbling encounter with Stephanie White's team. The player who trudged off that court visibly frustrated and publicly diminished was categorically not the same one who laced up and stepped back onto the floor for the games that followed. A quiet, genuinely terrifying metamorphosis was unfolding in real time, in full view of a watching world. Rather than retreating from the brand of physicality deliberately deployed to discourage and destabilize her, she began to absorb it, meet it head-on, and in certain moments, actively initiate it herself. She started lowering her shoulder on drives into the paint, using her body as a weapon to manufacture space in ways that were entirely absent from her earlier game. She was now performing with a controlled and directed ferocity, a hard-edged grit that began catching her opposition completely and consistently off guard. The turnovers, though still an inherent byproduct of her relentlessly aggressive style, began declining in frequency as her understanding of the intricate professional defensive systems being constructed around her sharpened dramatically, enabling quicker and more decisive decision-making and allowing her to sense traps assembling before they could snap shut. And then, almost without warning, the records began to collapse around her in a stunning and breathless cascade. Music. She became the fastest player in the entire history of the WNBA to accumulate 200 points and 50 assists, a milestone that placed her in a category that had no other occupants. She then demolished another landmark, becoming the quickest player ever to register 300 points, 100 rebounds, and 100 assists simultaneously. She had transcended pure scoring and evolved into something exponentially more dangerous. She was now orchestrating the entire offensive apparatus with the composed and masterful precision of a seasoned conductor, distributing jaw-dropping, no-look passes that fundamentally elevated the capabilities and confidence of every single teammate around her. This was her silent and methodically constructed response. This was the opening movement of her true and definitive message to the league. Every record she dismantled, every defensive scheme she carved apart with patient precision, and every single instance in which she absorbed punishment, rose off the floor, and returned stronger and more resolved than before, was another verse added to the story she was writing in real time. A story that proclaimed with absolute authority that she was immeasurably more than a long-range shooter with a marketing machine behind her. She was a leader, a warrior in the truest professional sense, and she was mastering the professional game at a pace that defied every reasonable expectation. The rest of the league had its eyes fixed on her. The fans around the world were watching without blinking. And you can be absolutely certain that Stephanie White was watching with the closest and most unsettled attention of anyone, absorbing with a growing and undeniable sense of unease the dawning recognition that the rookie she had confidently believed she had decoded was evolving with frightening speed into something far more dangerous, far more complete, and far more difficult to stop than anything her defensive blueprints had been designed to contain. As Caitlin Clark's game accelerated its evolution at a blistering and almost incomprehensible pace, the layered and intricate narrative being carefully constructed on the opposing sideline evolved right alongside it. Stephanie White, a sharp, composed, and thoroughly media-fluent head coach, continued performing her own brilliantly calibrated game of public chess with consummate skill. In the press conferences building toward their next scheduled collision, she offered eloquent and measured praise of Clark's once-in-a-generation talent, publicly acknowledging the breathtaking court vision, the limitless shooting range, and the profound and undeniable impact she had already stamped permanently onto the sport. She would label her great for the league, and discuss the Clark effect with a carefully measured tone of genuine respect and open admiration. But buried beneath this polished and carefully applied veneer of public praise was a subtle, strategically loaded, and quietly devastating subtext. Because for every compliment she extended with one hand, White would consistently and with practiced precision pivot with the other, steering the conversation toward the inherent challenges of navigating rookie status, the brutally steep learning curve that defines survival in the WNBA, and the critical and non-negotiable adjustments any young player must execute to build genuine longevity at the professional level. Music. She was simultaneously elevating Clark's public image with one breath while using the very next to remind the entire watching world, and perhaps most pointedly Clark herself, that she remained a rookie, still susceptible to mistakes, still exposed and exploitable when confronted with a precisely engineered game plan. It was a masterclass in the art of psychological warfare conducted entirely in plain sight. By openly and generously acknowledging the magnitude of Clark's talent, she methodically denied Clark and her coaching staff any clean and usable bulletin board material to ignite a locker room rally around. But by subtly and repeatedly returning to the unfinished edges of her game and the still ongoing learning process, she was transmitting a carefully encoded signal directly to her own roster. The phenom can be beaten. She was deliberately reframing the matchup, stripping away the mythology and repositioning it not as a hopeless battle against an untouchable media-manufactured superstar, but as a solvable tactical problem, one requiring nothing more exotic than disciplined execution and organized physicality. In the architecture of her own thinking, she remained the seasoned master at the board, and Clark was the supremely gifted but still developing student who had not yet absorbed all the lessons the professional game had waiting for her. And Stephanie White had every full intention of remaining the primary instructor. Music, methodically setting the stage for a second and more definitive showdown in which she planned to demonstrate once and for all that superior strategic intelligence and the weight of veteran experience could still triumph over even the most raw, explosive, and electrifying talent the sport had seen in a generation. The entire league sat in collective anticipation, waiting to see what new and punishing defensive wrinkle she would expose in the next chapter. And this is precisely where the shocking message, the one that has been quietly assembling itself since that very first bruising and defining encounter, is finally music, and irrevocably and completely delivered. It will not be leaked through the careful wording of a press conference statement. It will not erupt in a heated and emotional exchange across a sideline during a timeout. And it will certainly never be discovered buried inside a private message on anyone's phone. Caitlin Clark's true and definitive message to Stephanie White will be transmitted live on the hardwood, beneath the most unforgiving and brightest lights available, with the entire world as its witness. It is a message communicated not through a single spoken syllable, but through relentless, undeniable, and suffocating dominant action delivered possession by possession, quarter by quarter, game by game. And the message is this: the rookie you invested everything in trying to break is gone forever, and she is never, under any circumstances, coming back. Music. Every single time Clark now surgically navigates a perfectly constructed and coordinated double team and threads a pinpoint pass to an open teammate for an uncontested basket, she is sending a message. Every time she absorbs a hard, deliberately calculated foul designed to rattle her composure, peels herself up off the hardwood floor without a moment of complaint, and proceeds to bury both free throws with the steady, unhurried calm of a player who has been here 1,000 times before, she is sending a message. Every record-breaking performance she delivers is not simply a personal statistical achievement to be filed away and celebrated. It is a direct, music, unapologetic, and defiant declaration of intent. A permanent testament to her relentless and accelerating growth, and to the absolute unbreakable nature of her competitive will. And the most stunning and jarring dimension of this message lies in its target, which is deeply, unmistakably, and uncomfortably personal. It is aimed with unwavering and laser-guided precision directly at Stephanie White, the original architect and spiritual founder of the Indiana Fever's entire foundational past. Clark's ascending and record-shattering performance is a living, breathing, constantly updated declaration that this franchise is no longer defined, constrained, or shaped by its history or by the limitations of what it was previously capable of achieving. It is being rebuilt and reforged entirely in her image, right now, in front of every set of eyes that cares to watch. Her every movement on that court screams with absolute clarity, "The team you designed and constructed from nothing is now mine, and I am carrying it to a destination you never had the tools or the time to reach." It is a stunning, audacious, and completely wordless claim, made not through any interview or statement, but through a basketball and the unstoppable will of the person who controls it. She is demonstrating beyond any reasonable argument that she is not merely the future of this league sitting patiently in the waiting room. She is its dominant and commanding present. Music. And she is achieving it by systematically and methodically dismantling the very strategies and schemes that were engineered and deployed specifically to neutralize her, converting what were publicly identified as her most glaring weaknesses into undeniable, defense-shattering, game-breaking strengths that nobody yet has a reliable answer for. This stopped being just a basketball game the moment these two first locked eyes across a sideline. It is the hostile and total takeover of a franchise's identity, its direction, and its destiny, led by its new, unshakable, unapologetic, and supremely gifted queen who has only just begun to show the world what she is truly capable of. And so, as the Indiana Fever and the Dallas Wings prepare to stand across from one another once again, the stakes have been elevated to a level that borders on the unbearable for everyone invested in the outcome. This is immeasurably more than just another entry on the WNBA regular season schedule. It is a profound and deeply charged collision of entire eras, an intensely personal duel fought between the past and the future for possession of the very soul and identity of a franchise. On one side of the battlefield stands Stephanie White, the brilliant and calculating veteran strategist, the original architect who poured the first foundation of the Fever, arriving armed with a physically capable and battle-tested veteran roster and a meticulously constructed game plan engineered to locate and ruthlessly expose every remaining crack in a young player's still developing armor. She carries with her the full weight of legacy, the authority of hard-earned and hard-won experience, and the respect of an established order that she helped create and has long represented. On the other side stands Caitlin Clark, The phenomenon who has not simply survived the initial and overwhelming storm that was designed specifically to swallow her whole, but has reached into its very center, seized its energy, and used it as raw fuel to emerge stronger, tougher, sharper, and more intensely focused than she has ever been at any prior point in her life. She carries within her a revolution, the beating heart of a new era of basketball, and she is in the active and ongoing process of delivering a silent, powerful, world-altering message that she will not be intimidated by history, she will not be broken by strategy, and she will most certainly not be denied her place at the absolute pinnacle of the sport. This next game is the ultimate examination, the final and most consequential test the season has produced. It has become a full and formal referendum on whether the calculated wisdom of veteran experience can still successfully contain and suppress a once-in-a-generation talent that is evolving at a rate that defies every established precedent the league has on record. Will Stephanie White's brilliantly executed chess match once again place the ascending star in check, delivering proof to the world that strategic mastery and accumulated wisdom still reign supreme over raw ability and youthful fire? Or will Caitlin Clark's undeniable and ever-growing force, combined with her relentless and seemingly limitless evolution, finally and completely overwhelm the master architect, announcing to every franchise, every coach, and every veteran player in the league that a permanent and irreversible shift in the balance of power has arrived and cannot be undone? The message has been sent with unmistakable clarity. The battle lines have been drawn with permanent ink. And the entire basketball world is standing still, collectively holding its breath in stunned and electric anticipation, waiting to see who remains standing tall when that final, deafening, history-making buzzer splits the air.